The security scanner emitted 3 sharp beeps. Staff Sergeant David Mitchell swept it across the black sedan once more, this time moving deliberately slower. The result remained unchanged. A dense metallic signature emanated from the boot. The weight distribution seemed off. The reading suggested something substantial, something living. Queen Camilla positioned herself 15 feet distant, her smile strained, her gaze monitoring his every action. She'd been observing him for 5 solid minutes. This wasn't passive watching. This was surveillance. Mitchell had served 8 years as a Royal Guard. Prior to that, he'd completed 3 deployments in Afghanistan with the Parachute Regiment, first sent abroad at 26. Now 34, he'd accumulated sufficient experience to recognize when circumstances weren't right. Presently, every survival instinct he'd developed in Helmand Province was signaling danger. The vehicle had no business being there. Not at Windsor Castle, not at 4:30 on a Tuesday afternoon, not lacking proper authorization, and absolutely not with Queen Camilla positioned beside it, personally overseeing its exit. Mitchell occupied the west courtyard of Windsor Castle. Gray clouds suspended low above the ancient stone barriers. No ceremonies were scheduled, no media presence, merely the quiet conclusion of an autumn afternoon, the sort where footsteps echoed against cobblestones. His duty had commenced at 6 that morning. Standard 12-hour rotation. The initial 8 hours had passed without incident. Guard rotation at midday. Patrol inspections every 20 minutes. Nothing unusual, nothing misplaced. Then at 4:15, the black sedan had entered the service courtyard. Not the primary entrance, but the service sector, where deliveries arrived, where staff vehicles underwent inspection and documentation. Mitchell had observed its arrival from his station near the west archway. Initially, he'd dismissed it. Vehicles came and departed regularly as part of palace operations. Then Queen Camilla had materialized, not from within the palace, but from the vehicle itself. She'd already been inside, waiting. That detail felt wrong initially. Throughout his 8 years of service, Mitchell had never witnessed Camilla utilizing the service entrance, never observed her arriving in an unmarked vehicle, never seen her without at minimum 1 aide or security officer. Today she stood alone, just herself and the driver, and she was personally supervising luggage placement into the boot. Mitchell's training activated. Not dramatically, not conspicuously, simply a subtle attention shift. He observed while appearing not to observe. Standard surveillance methodology. 3 substantial suitcases. Designer luggage. Louis Vuitton, he estimated. Each heavy enough that the driver struggled somewhat lifting them. Camilla directed their arrangement, very particular about positioning. Then a 4th item, smaller. A travel trunk, old-fashioned design, leather fastenings, metal reinforcements. The type employed for transporting valuables. That trunk loaded last. Camilla monitored it with exceptional attention, ensured it positioned centrally in the boot, ensured nothing contacted it. Mitchell had witnessed similar behavior previously. Different context, different nation, but identical pattern. Individuals being extraordinarily careful with something important, something they couldn't risk damaging, something they couldn't afford losing. He checked his watch. 4:23. Guard rotation in 7 minutes. If he intended to inspect the vehicle, he needed to act immediately. Once the replacement shift arrived, once the car departed the courtyard, the opportunity would vanish. Mitchell's thoughts returned to Helmand. June 2017. Mid-afternoon. Temperature approaching 42 degrees Celsius. The type of heat that plastered uniforms to skin and transformed metal surfaces into branding irons. A vehicle had approached their checkpoint. White Toyota pickup, common enough regionally. Civilian registration. 2 occupants visible through the windscreen. Mitchell had manned checkpoint duty for 6 hours that day. Had processed perhaps 30 vehicles. All routine, all normal. But this one felt different. The driver was perspiring. Not unusual in that heat, but sweating excessively. Hands gripping the wheel too tightly, eyes darting between guards. The passenger, however, remained calm. Too calm. Sitting relaxed as though on a leisurely drive, as though armed soldiers weren't aiming rifles at his vehicle. Mitchell had learned something during his first deployment. People reacted to stress predictably. Fear manifested in body language. Nervousness displayed in behavior. When someone wasn't exhibiting those indicators in situations that should produce them, it meant they were either remarkably brave or extremely dangerous. In Afghanistan, it usually meant the latter. His sergeant then, a man named Williams with 16 years military experience, had noticed Mitchell's focus on the vehicle, had seen him studying the occupants with particular concentration. Williams had approached, positioned himself beside Mitchell, observed the same vehicle. "What are you seeing?" Williams had inquired quietly. "Driver's nervous," Mitchell had responded. "Passenger isn't, and the rear suspension appears wrong, like there's weight back there that shouldn't exist." Williams had studied the vehicle another 10 seconds, then nodded once. "Your eyes perceive things before your brain processes them," Williams had said. "Don't disregard that sensation. Trust what you observe." They'd halted the vehicle, conducted complete inspection. The driver had objected, claimed urgent business, attempted everything to persuade them to grant passage. The passenger had remained silent. That calm, relaxed demeanor never altering. Even when ordered from the truck, even when searching commenced, they discovered the explosives concealed beneath a false floor in the cargo bed. 40 kilograms, military grade, connected to a detonator the driver could trigger from the cab. The driver had planned to pass the checkpoint, approach the base perimeter, and detonate, eliminate as many soldiers as possible, likely killing himself and the passenger simultaneously. The passenger had known, had accepted it. That explained his calmness. He'd already reconciled with dying. Williams had pulled Mitchell aside afterward, after they'd secured the scene, after EOD had removed the explosives, after both occupants had been detained. "Sound instincts," Williams had said. "You noticed something everyone else missed. That's the distinction between returning home and returning home in a casket. Continue trusting your instincts." Mitchell had carried that lesson through 2 additional deployments, through countless checkpoints, through every situation where his intuition indicated something was wrong. He'd learned to trust that sensation. The sensation stating, "Look closer. Verify again. Don't assume everything appears as it seems." That sensation had preserved him alive, had preserved his unit alive, had prevented attacks and saved lives in ways never appearing in official reports. Presently, standing in Windsor Castle courtyard, watching Queen Camilla personally oversee an unauthorized vehicle's loading, that identical sensation was screaming at him. "Something is wrong. Inspect the vehicle. Don't permit its departure until you know what's inside." He advanced forward. Casual movement, nothing aggressive, merely a guard performing his duties. Camilla's head pivoted immediately. She tracked his approach with that fixed smile. The smile people displayed when wanting to appear unconcerned, but weren't. Mitchell had witnessed that smile previously too. Different faces, identical meaning. "I'm watching you. Don't approach closer. Don't ask questions," he continued walking. "Ma'am," he said, halting 6 feet from the car. "Professional distance, respectful yet firm. I need to verify vehicle clearance before departure." Camilla's smile didn't waver. "That won't be necessary, Sergeant. This is a private family matter." Private family matter. The phrase suspended in the air between them. Mitchell had heard similar phrases previously, typically from individuals who didn't want official scrutiny, who needed matters handled quietly, who couldn't afford documentation. "I understand, ma'am," Mitchell said, "but all vehicles departing Windsor require security clearance. No exceptions." He maintained his voice neutral. No challenge, no accusation, merely stating protocol. Camilla's eyes narrowed slightly. Not substantially, just enough for Mitchell to notice. "I'm quite aware of protocol, Sergeant, and I'm informing you this vehicle has my personal authorization." Personal authorization. Another interesting phrase. Mitchell knew the actual protocols. Royal family members could authorize their own vehicles for personal use. But those authorizations still required logging, still required documentation, still required security verification. This car hadn't been logged. Mitchell had checked the departure sheet 15 minutes ago. No vehicles authorized for Queen Camilla today. No private travel, no official engagements, nothing. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I don't see this vehicle on today's departure authorization. I'll need to verify with the guard commander before I can." "You'll do no such thing." Camilla's voice had transformed. Sharper presently, less smile, more command. "This is a private matter, Sergeant. It doesn't concern you." Mitchell maintained her gaze. He'd been in situations like this previously. Different context, but identical dynamic. Someone with authority attempting to prevent inspection using rank, using position, using fear. It never concluded well. "Ma'am," Mitchell said quietly, "I have a duty to inspect all departing vehicles. I'm going to need to check the boot." For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Camilla stared at him. The driver, still positioned near the car, looked between them nervously. Then Camilla advanced forward, closer than necessary, close enough that Mitchell could detect her perfume, something floral, expensive. "Sergeant," she said, her voice low and precise, "I am the Queen Consort. I am informing you that this vehicle doesn't require inspection. If you persist with this course of action, I will have you removed from palace service. Do you understand?" Mitchell had been threatened previously. Taliban fighters had aimed rifles at his face. IEDs had detonated within 50 meters. He'd been fired upon, mortared, and once had a blade held to his throat during close-quarters operations. Threats didn't affect him. "Ma'am," he said, his voice unchanged, "I'm going to inspect the vehicle now." He stepped around her, not aggressively, not disrespectfully, just advancing with his duty. That's when he heard it. A sound, faint, emanating from the boot. Not shifting luggage sounds, not something settling sounds, not the natural sounds a vehicle produces when metal expands and contracts with temperature changes. This was deliberate, rhythmic, human. A thud, single impact, like a fist or foot striking metal from inside. Mitchell froze. Every sense suddenly concentrated on that sound. The courtyard surrounding him disappeared. The conversation with Camilla faded. Everything narrowed to just that boot and what might be inside it. He counted mentally, training from Afghanistan. When you heard something potentially important, you waited, you listened, you confirmed before reacting. 1, 2, 3 seconds of silence. Then another thud. Same intensity, same location, same deliberate quality. Someone was in that boot. Someone was striking it from inside. Someone wanted to be heard. Mitchell's heart rate increased, not from fear, from recognition, from understanding the situation had just transformed from suspicious to critical. He'd heard sounds like this previously. Hostage situations in Kabul, rooms where prisoners were confined, buildings where insurgents had concealed captured soldiers. Always the identical pattern. Deliberate knocking, controlled impacts, the sound of someone who couldn't call out but could generate noise, the sound of someone who needed assistance and was doing everything possible to signal their presence. Mitchell took a step toward the vehicle's rear. Camilla said something behind him. He didn't hear it, didn't process it. All his attention was on that boot. He reached it, placed his hand flat against the metal, cold beneath his palm. Smooth, expensive car, luxury vehicle, the type of car that should never contain someone trapped inside. And then he felt it. A vibration transmitted through the metal, someone moving inside, shifting position, and then another thud, stronger this time, directly under his hand. Whoever was inside knew he was close, was trying harder, striking the metal with more force, trying to make absolutely certain they were heard. Mitchell pressed his ear close to the boot, listening, straining to hear anything beyond the impacts. That's when he heard the voice. "Help!" One word, muffled, almost inaudible, filtered through metal and whatever materials were packed around the person inside, but unmistakable. A child's voice. Young, frightened, desperate. And not just any child. Mitchell had been around the palace sufficiently long, had heard enough morning greetings, had stood guard during enough family arrivals and departures. He knew that voice. Princess Charlotte. The realization struck him like a physical blow. Not just someone in the boot, not just a child, a member of the royal family he'd sworn to protect. An 8-year-old girl who should have been at Kensington Palace with her protection team, who should have been safe, who should never, under any circumstances, be locked inside a vehicle boot. Mitchell's blood went cold, that ice water sensation he'd experienced in combat, when situations transformed from bad to critical in seconds, when training assumed control and emotion became secondary to action. His hand remained on the boot. He could feel another impact. Weaker this time, like whoever was inside was tiring, running out of strength to continue signaling. That decided it. No more waiting. No more procedure. No more diplomatic consideration for who was in the car or what authority they claimed. Someone, a child, was trapped in that boot, had been calling for help, had been striking the metal with whatever strength they had remaining, and Mitchell was going to extract them right now, regardless of what it cost him. He'd heard children's voices in Afghanistan, usually crying, sometimes screaming, once memorably, a little girl who'd been trapped beneath rubble after a building collapse. They excavated for 6 hours to reach her. When they extracted her, she'd looked up at Mitchell with these wide, terrified eyes. The same eyes he'd later learn belonged to Princess Charlotte. He'd seen her dozens of times around the palace, 7 years old, always polite, always smiling, always with at minimum 2 security officers. That voice in the boot muffled, terrified, desperate. It sounded exactly like her. Mitchell didn't think. He acted. His hand went to the boot release. Locked. He tried the driver's side door. Locked as well. "Sergeant Mitchell, I am ordering you. Open the boot." Mitchell's voice had transformed now. No courtesy, no diplomatic language, just command. "Open it now." Camilla stood perfectly motionless. "There is nothing in that boot that concerns you. Open the boot." Behind him, Mitchell heard footsteps, quick steps. He glanced over his shoulder. Corporal James Harrison, part of the same guard unit, had materialized from the north archway. Harrison had spotted the situation, was moving to assist. Good. Backup was always beneficial. "Ma'am," Harrison said, arriving beside Mitchell. "Is there a problem?" Mitchell didn't wait for Camilla to respond. "There's someone in the boot," he said. "A child. I heard them call for help." Harrison's expression transformed immediately. He'd served with Mitchell in Afghanistan, knew him sufficiently well to trust his judgment without question. "Driver," Harrison said, turning to the man still positioned by the car, "open the boot now." The driver looked at Camilla, seeking permission, seeking guidance. "Don't you dare," Camilla said. That confirmed it. If there was nothing in the boot, if this was just luggage, if this was truly a private matter, Camilla would have opened it immediately, would have shown them they were wrong, would have made them appear foolish. Instead, she was blocking them, preventing inspection, which meant she knew what was inside, which meant she didn't want them to see it. Mitchell made his decision. He'd carried a small toolkit during his Afghanistan deployments. Multi-tool, lockpicks, emergency pry bar, standard equipment for a soldier who might need to access locked buildings or vehicles. He still carried a version of that kit, smaller now, but functional. He reached into his jacket pocket. "Sergeant, if you touch that vehicle," Camilla started. Mitchell extracted the small pry bar, inserted it into the gap between the boot and the frame, applied pressure. The lock mechanism resisted for 3 seconds. Then it fractured with a sharp crack. The boot popped open. Mitchell lifted it fully. The hinges creaked slightly. Afternoon light flooded into the dark space. He stopped breathing. Inside the boot, wedged between the leather suitcases like a discarded object, was Princess Charlotte. 8 years old, maybe 90 pounds, wearing her school uniform. The same one Mitchell had seen her wearing that morning during his first patrol check. White shirt, navy blue cardigan with the school crest, gray skirt. One of her knee socks had slipped down to her ankle. Her hands were behind her back. Duct tape wrapped around her wrists. Multiple layers applied tight enough that Mitchell could see the adhesive pressing into her skin, creating red marks where she'd pulled against the restraints. Her ankles were bound the same way. Tape wound several times around both legs. Whoever had done this had been thorough, had wanted to make absolutely certain she couldn't move, couldn't kick, couldn't escape. A strip of tape covered her mouth, silver-gray industrial tape, the kind used for packing boxes and sealing cargo, applied carefully across her lips and part of her cheeks. Her nose was visible above it, nostrils flaring as she struggled to breathe properly through limited air passages. Her hair, usually neat, usually carefully styled, was disheveled. Strands stuck to her forehead with sweat. The boot had no ventilation, had been heating in the afternoon sun. She'd been breathing limited air in an enclosed space. But it was her eyes that struck Mitchell the hardest. Wide, terrified, showing white all around the irises. The type of fear you only witnessed in combat situations. In people who thought they might die. In children who didn't understand what was happening, but knew it was bad. Those eyes locked onto Mitchell's face. Recognition flashed through the terror. She knew him, had seen him around the palace, had probably waved to him during morning arrivals. She tried to make a sound, muffled by the tape, not words, just a desperate pleading noise. The sound of someone who'd been calling for help and had finally been heard. Mitchell could see tear tracks on her face, old tears and new ones. She'd been crying, probably since the moment they'd closed the boot. Maybe before that. Maybe since the moment someone had grabbed her and started wrapping tape around her wrists. How long had she been in there? Mitchell's mind calculated. The car had entered the courtyard at 4:15, but Charlotte might have been placed inside before that. Might have been trapped in darkness and terror for longer. 30 minutes, 45, an hour. Mitchell had witnessed combat, had seen IED victims with their legs destroyed, had seen buildings collapse on civilians, had seen soldiers expire in his arms, despite everything medical teams attempted, had seen children caught in crossfire, had extracted bodies from rubble. He'd thought he'd witnessed the worst humanity could inflict upon itself. But this was different. This wasn't war. This wasn't combat. This wasn't a situation where violence was expected and death was a possibility everyone had accepted. This was Windsor Castle, the heart of British heritage, a place representing tradition and stability, and the continuity of a nation. And a member of the royal family, someone who wore a crown, someone who had titles and position and authority, had just treated an 8-year-old child like an inconvenient object to be stored away, had bound her hands and covered her mouth and locked her in a boot, in darkness, in terror, in a space so small she could barely move. For what? For spilling tea? For embarrassing someone at a social event? Mitchell had witnessed Taliban fighters show more humanity toward prisoners, had seen insurgents treat captured soldiers with more basic dignity than this. He felt something shift inside him, something cold and final and absolutely certain. Whatever protocol stated, whatever consequences might follow, whatever happened to his career or his position or his future, none of that mattered. What mattered was that a child was before him, bound, terrified, looking at him with eyes that begged for help, and he was going to provide it. He reached into the boot, careful not to hurt her, careful not to frighten her more than she already was. His hands found the tape on her wrists. "Charlotte," he said quietly, using her first name. No titles now. Just speaking to a terrified child who needed to hear a familiar voice. "I'm gonna get you out. You're safe now. I promise you're safe." She nodded, still crying, but her eyes showed understanding, relief. Mitchell worked the tape loose. The bindings had been tight, too tight. Her wrists were red, where the adhesive had pressed into her skin. Whoever had done this hadn't been gentle. Behind him, Harrison had moved to block Camilla. The Queen Consort had started forward. Harrison's body language was clear. "Don't interfere, don't come closer." Mitchell got Charlotte's hands free, then moved to her ankles. Same tape, same tight binding. The marks on her skin showed she'd been restrained for a while. Maybe 30 minutes, maybe longer. He lifted her from the boot. She weighed almost nothing. Small for her age, fragile. The moment Mitchell set her down, she wrapped her arms around him, holding on, still crying, still terrified. Mitchell knelt down to her level, gently removed the tape from her mouth, slowly, carefully, trying not to hurt her more than necessary. The tape came off. Charlotte gasped, took a deep breath, then another. "You're okay," Mitchell said quietly. "You're safe. I've got you." She nodded against his shoulder. Couldn't speak yet. Just held on to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly become terrifying. Mitchell looked up at Camilla. The Queen Consort stood 5 feet away. Her face was pale, not from shock, from calculation, from realizing exactly how bad this appeared. "Explain," Mitchell said. "Not a request, a demand." Camilla straightened her spine, composed herself. When she spoke, her voice was controlled, almost casual. The child was being disciplined. She'd embarrassed me in front of guests. This was a private family matter. Mitchell stared at her, processing those words. Family matter. Discipline. As if binding an 8-year-old child and locking her in a boot was a reasonable response to childhood misbehavior. "You put her in the boot," Mitchell said slowly. "I placed her somewhere quiet where she could reflect on her actions," Camilla said. Nothing more. Charlotte made a sound against Mitchell's shoulder. Not words, just a whimper of fear, of memory. Mitchell felt something shift inside him, something cold and final. He'd been trained to respect rank, to follow protocol, to maintain professional distance between himself and the royal family. All of that training disappeared. "Harrison," Mitchell said, his voice perfectly level. "Radio the guard commander. Tell him we have a Code 3 situation. Then contact the Metropolitan Police. We need child protection services here immediately. Code 3. Emergency involving a royal family member. The highest priority alert in palace security." Harrison didn't hesitate, pulled his radio, started calling. Camilla took a step forward. "You're making a terrible mistake, Sergeant." Mitchell stood, Charlotte still holding on to him. He looked at Camilla, really looked at her, saw through the title, through the crown, through the position, saw what she actually was. "The only mistake," Mitchell said quietly, "was thinking you could do this without consequences." He turned away from her, didn't wait for a response, carried Charlotte toward the guardhouse, away from the car, away from Camilla, away from whatever had just happened. Behind him, he heard Camilla's voice, sharp, commanding. "Sergeant Mitchell, I am ordering you to." Mitchell kept walking. Charlotte held on to him tighter. "You're safe now," he said because she needed to hear it, because he needed to say it. "I promise you're safe." The subsequent 15 minutes passed in controlled chaos. Guard Commander Richard Wells arrived first. Former Special Forces, 20 years military experience, zero tolerance for protocol violations. He took one look at Charlotte, still holding Mitchell, still terrified, and his expression went cold. "Briefing," Wells said. "Now." Mitchell explained quickly, efficiently, the unauthorized vehicle, the sounds from the boot, Camilla's refusal to allow inspection, finding Charlotte bound and gagged. Wells listened without interruption. When Mitchell finished, Wells turned to look at Camilla, still standing by the car, isolated now. Several guards had formed a perimeter around her, not restraining her, just ensuring she didn't leave. "Ma'am," Wells said, his voice carrying across the courtyard, "you're going to wait right there. Don't move, don't speak, don't touch anything." Camilla opened her mouth. Wells raised one hand. "I said don't speak." The Queen Consort closed her mouth. For the first time since Mitchell had known her, she appeared uncertain, vulnerable. Good, Mitchell thought. Let her feel a fraction of what Charlotte felt. The Metropolitan Police arrived next. 2 officers from the Royal Protection Squad. They'd been on duty at a nearby location. 3-minute response time. Detective Inspector Chen assumed charge immediately. 38 years old, 15 years with the Met, specialist in royal security. She'd worked with Mitchell previously, knew him as reliable, professional. She knelt down beside Charlotte. Gentle approach, non-threatening. The way you approach traumatized children who'd been through something terrible. "Hi, Charlotte," Chen said softly. "My name is Sarah. I'm a police officer. I know you've been through something scary, but you're safe now. Nobody's going to hurt you. I just need to ask you some questions. Is that okay?" Charlotte looked up at Mitchell, seeking permission, seeking reassurance, ensuring it was actually safe to talk. Mitchell nodded. "It's okay. You can tell her everything. Chen is here to help." Charlotte took a breath. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but clear, the voice of a child who'd been taught to speak properly, who'd had elocution lessons and diplomatic training, but with the tremor of someone who'd just been genuinely frightened. "We were having tea," she said, "in the green drawing room, with some American guests, important people. Mommy had told me that morning that we were hosting them. She said I should come, said it would be good practice for my manners." Chen nodded encouragingly. "That sounds nice. What happened at the tea?" Charlotte's hands twisted together, a nervous gesture. There were 6 guests, 3 men in suits, 3 women in dresses. Camilla was hosting. She kept talking about how well-behaved I was, how polite the royal children are. She kept using me as an example. Chen made notes, didn't interrupt. Let Charlotte tell it in her own way. I was sitting on the sofa, Charlotte continued, between Camilla and one of the American ladies. They'd given me a proper teacup, not a child's cup, a real one, to show I could handle it properly. Her voice got smaller. I was being careful. I promise I was being so careful. But the lady next to me laughed at something someone said. She moved suddenly. Her elbow bumped my arm. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. The teacup tipped. Not a lot, just a little. But some tea spilled, maybe a tablespoon. It went on Camilla's dress, on her lap. Just a little bit. Mitchell watched Charlotte's face as she remembered. Saw the moment when fear had replaced the normal atmosphere of a social event. I said sorry immediately, Charlotte said. I said it 3 times. I'm so sorry, Your Majesty. I'm so sorry. It was an accident. I'm so sorry. I was already reaching for napkins, already trying to help clean it up. She took another breath, steadying herself. But Camilla stood up really fast, really suddenly. Her face was different, angry but also cold. She looked at the guests and smiled. But her eyes weren't smiling. She said, "Children can be so clumsy, can't they? I do apologize for this disruption." Chen nodded. What happened next? She grabbed my arm. Really hard. Hard enough that it hurt. Hard enough that I made a small sound. But she was still smiling at the guests, still acting like everything was fine. Charlotte rubbed her arm where apparently a bruise had formed. Mitchell could see it now. Finger-shaped marks on her upper arm. She pulled me up from the sofa, Charlotte continued. Said to the guests, "Please excuse us for a moment. The princess needs to learn that actions have consequences." She said it in a nice voice, like she was being a good step-grandmother, but her hand on my arm was so tight. Mitchell's jaw clenched. He didn't interrupt. Let Charlotte finish. She took me out of the room, into the corridor. As soon as the door closed behind us, her face changed completely. No more smile, just anger. She said I'd embarrassed her in front of important people, said I'd made her look bad, said I'd ruined an important meeting. Charlotte's voice got quieter. I said it was an accident, said I was sorry, but she said sorry wasn't enough, said I needed to learn respect, said children these days don't understand consequences. Chen made more notes. Then what happened? She called for 2 staff members, Mr. Davidson and Mrs. Lee. They came from the staff quarters. They looked scared, like they didn't want to be there, like they knew something bad was happening. Charlotte wiped her eyes. Camilla told them to take me to the car in the service courtyard, said I needed to be taught a lesson, said I needed some time to think about what I'd done. Did the staff members say anything? Chen asked. Mrs. Lee said, "Your Majesty, perhaps this isn't necessary." She said it very quietly, very respectfully. But Camilla turned to her and said if she didn't follow instructions immediately, she'd be dismissed before the day ended. Said she'd make sure Mrs. Lee never worked in any royal household again. Charlotte took another breath. So they took me to the car. Mr. Davidson was holding my hand. He kept saying, "I'm sorry, Princess, I'm so sorry." But he didn't stop, didn't refuse. He was too scared. And then Camilla followed us to the car. She had a roll of tape, the gray tape they use for packing boxes. She told Mr. Davidson to tape my wrists. He didn't want to. I could see it in his face. But he did it. He taped my hands behind my back. Charlotte demonstrated, putting her hands behind her. Then she told him to tape my ankles. So I couldn't run. So I couldn't kick. So I couldn't escape. Mitchell felt his hands clench into fists, forced himself to relax them, to stay professional. Then she put the tape on my mouth, Charlotte said. She did that part herself. She said, "This is so you can think quietly about what you did. No talking, no crying. Just thinking." She pressed it really hard. It hurt when she pulled my hair putting it on. And then, Charlotte's voice became very small. Then they put me in the boot. Camilla told them to put me in the center, between the suitcases, so I wouldn't move around when the car was driving. Mr. Davidson put a blanket under me first. I think he was trying to make it less hard, but it was still the boot. It was still dark. Tears were flowing freely now. Camilla looked down at me before they closed it. She said, "When you're ready to apologize properly, when you're ready to show real respect, then we'll let you out. Until then, you can think about your behavior." Charlotte sobbed once. Then she closed the boot. Everything went dark. I couldn't see anything. I could barely breathe. The air was bad, hot, It smelled like car things, like metal and rubber. How long were you in there? Chen asked gently. I don't know. It felt like forever. I tried to count, but I kept losing track. I tried to stay calm, like Mommy taught me, but I was so scared. I thought maybe they'd forget about me. Maybe they'd drive somewhere and I'd never get out. Is that when you started knocking? Charlotte nodded. I waited at first, thought they'd come back quickly, thought Camilla would change her mind. But nobody came. So I started kicking the boot, trying to make noise, hoping someone would hear. You did exactly the right thing, Chen said firmly. Being brave, making noise. That's how Sergeant Mitchell found you. Charlotte looked at Mitchell. I heard your voice. When you were talking to Camilla, I didn't hear all the words, but I heard you asking questions. I knew you were a guard. I knew guards help people, so I kicked harder. I tried to yell through the tape. I wanted you to hear me. Mitchell's throat tightened. This child, 8 years old, bound and terrified in a dark boot, had still had the presence of mind to make noise when she'd heard someone nearby who might help. That was courage, real courage, not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. Mitchell checked his watch. 4:47. The car had arrived at 4:15. Charlotte had been in that boot for at minimum 30 minutes, possibly longer if she'd been placed inside before the car entered the courtyard. 30 minutes in darkness, bound, unable to breathe properly, terrified, for spilling tea. Mitchell looked across the courtyard at Camilla. She was watching them, not with concern, with calculation, already planning her defense, already preparing her explanation. Chen stood up. Thank you, Charlotte. You've been very brave. She turned to Mitchell. I need to take photographs. Document the marks on her wrists and ankles. Then we'll need a formal statement. Mitchell nodded. Whatever you need. Chen took her phone out, started documenting the red marks on Charlotte's wrists, the corresponding marks on her ankles, the fear still visible in her eyes. Evidence, cold, clinical, necessary. While Chen worked, Mitchell's mind was processing, trying to understand, trying to make sense of something that made no sense. He'd been in Afghanistan, had witnessed Taliban fighters do terrible things, had seen children used as weapons, as shields, as tools. But this was England, Windsor Castle, the heart of the royal family, and a queen consort had just treated a child like an inconvenient object to be stored away. How was that possible? How did someone look at a frightened 8-year-old and decide that binding her hands and locking her in a boot was an appropriate response? Mitchell didn't have an answer, wasn't sure he wanted one. Chen finished photographing, put her phone away. I need to speak with Queen Camilla now. Good luck with that, Wells said. He'd been standing nearby, monitoring the situation. She's already lawyered up. Called her personal solicitor 3 minutes ago. Of course she had. Because innocent people always called lawyers immediately. Chen walked across the courtyard. Mitchell watched, saw her halt before Camilla, saw the conversation begin. Couldn't hear the words, but the body language told the story. Camilla, defensive, indignant, explaining. Chen, unmoved, professional, documenting. The driver had been separated, interviewed by another officer. From what Mitchell could see, the man was talking freely, probably explaining that he'd just followed orders, that he'd been uncomfortable with the situation, that he'd been afraid of losing his employment. Standard response from people in bad situations. Following orders, just doing their job, didn't question it because questioning meant consequences. Mitchell had heard those explanations previously, in military tribunals, in post-operation debriefings, usually from people trying to justify actions they knew were wrong. Charlotte tugged on Mitchell's sleeve. He looked down at her. Thank you for finding me, she said quietly. Mitchell's throat tightened. You're welcome. I kept knocking. I wasn't sure anyone would hear. I heard you. Mitchell knelt down again, eye level. And even if I hadn't heard you, I would have checked. That's my job, to keep you safe. Charlotte nodded. Then, quieter. Camilla said no one would believe me. She said I was just a child and she was the queen. She said if I told anyone, I'd be in trouble. The words hung in the air. Cold, calculated. Exactly the kind of thing an abuser would say to their victim. Don't tell. No one will believe you. You'll be the one punished. Mitchell had heard similar words in different contexts. From Taliban leaders controlling their communities, from criminals intimidating witnesses, from anyone who held power and wanted to keep their actions hidden. She was wrong, Mitchell said firmly. I believe you. Di Chen believes you. Everyone here believes you. And you're not in trouble. You did nothing wrong. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears again. Not from fear this time, from relief. From hearing words she'd needed to hear. A car approached. Black Range Rover, Palace registration, moving fast. Wells straightened. That'll be the parents. Mitchell stood, watched the vehicle enter the courtyard. It halted 20 feet away. The rear door opened before the driver could come around. Prince William stepped out. No jacket, shirt sleeves rolled up, face tight with controlled fury. He saw Charlotte first, his daughter, still standing close to Mitchell, still frightened, still showing the effects of what had happened. William covered the distance in seconds, knelt down, pulled Charlotte into his arms, held her without words, just held her. Mitchell stepped back, giving them space, giving them privacy. Catherine emerged from the car next. Kate, looking pale, looking terrified. She moved to her husband and daughter, family closing ranks, protecting their own. William stood, Charlotte in his arms. He looked at Mitchell. Report, not a request. A command from a future king. Mitchell gave it. Same as before. Clear, efficient, facts only. No interpretation, no emotion. William listened. His expression didn't change, but his arms tightened around Charlotte. When Mitchell finished, William turned to look at Camilla. She was still across the courtyard, still surrounded by guards and police, still trying to maintain some appearance of dignity. Catherine, William said quietly, take Charlotte to the car. Kate nodded, took Charlotte from William's arms, whispered something Mitchell couldn't hear, carried her daughter back to the Range Rover. William watched them depart, ensured they were safe. Then he turned back to Mitchell. Did she resist when you tried to inspect the vehicle? Yes, sir. Claimed it was a private family matter. Ordered me to stand down. Threatened my position. And you inspected anyway? Yes, sir. I heard sounds from the boot. Heard a child's voice calling for help. At that point, protocol was irrelevant. William nodded slowly. Good. He turned to Wells. I want a full investigation. I want every person who was involved identified and interviewed. I want documentation of every order given, every action taken. Already underway, sir, Wells said. And I want Sergeant Mitchell's actions officially commended. He's getting a written recognition for this. From me personally, Mitchell blinked. That's not necessary, sir. It absolutely is necessary. William's voice was firm. You did what you were supposed to do, what you were sworn to do. You protected a member of this family when others failed to. That deserves recognition. He paused, then quieter. Thank you. 2 words. Simple, but carrying weight behind them. Mitchell nodded. Just doing my job, sir. William's expression softened slightly, almost a smile. If every guard did their job the way you just did, this family would be significantly safer. He turned to look at Camilla again. The Queen Consort was watching them, waiting, probably hoping William would defend her, would understand, would accept her explanation. William started walking toward her. Mitchell watched, saw the moment when Camilla realized this wasn't going to proceed the way she'd expected. The conversation was brief. Mitchell couldn't hear all of it, but he heard enough. William's voice. You will not be near my children again. Not unsupervised. Not alone. Not until I'm satisfied you understand what you did wrong. Camilla's response. Something defensive. Something about discipline. About embarrassment. William cutting her off. You bound my daughter's hands. You covered her mouth. You locked her in a boot. And you were planning to drive away. What was your plan? Where were you taking her? How long were you planning to keep her there? Silence from Camilla. William again. You're done here today. Go back to your residence. Don't speak to the press. Don't issue statements. Don't try to control this narrative. Because if you do, I will ensure every single detail of what happened here becomes public record. Mitchell saw Camilla's shoulders slump, saw the moment when she realized she'd lost this confrontation. William turned away from her, walked back to Wells. Ensure she gets home safely, but she doesn't go anywhere else. Not until Charles is informed. Not until we've decided how to handle this. Understood, sir, Wells said. William looked at Mitchell one more time, nodded, then walked back to his car. To Kate. To Charlotte. The Range Rover drove away, taking Princess Charlotte somewhere safe, somewhere Camilla couldn't reach her. Mitchell watched them depart, felt something settle in his chest. Not pride exactly, just satisfaction. The satisfaction of knowing he'd done the right thing, even when it was difficult, even when it meant defying someone who outranked him by every possible measure. Behind him, Chen had finished her interview, was walking back toward Mitchell. "Well," she said, halting beside him, "that's going to be interesting paperwork." Mitchell almost smiled. "Interesting is one word for it." "For what it's worth," Chen said, "you did the right thing. Most guards would have backed down when a royal told them to stop. You didn't. Most guards haven't been in combat," Mitchell replied. "Haven't learned that orders from authority don't mean anything if following them gets people hurt." Chen nodded. "True enough." She paused. "I need you to come down to the station tomorrow. Give a formal statement. I know you gave me the basics, but we'll need everything documented properly. This is going to be a significant case. I'll be there. Bring your union representative, just in case." Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "You think I'll need one? I think Camilla has expensive lawyers who are going to try very hard to make this your fault somehow. Better to have representation just in case they succeed." "Fair point. I'll bring someone." Chen nodded, walked away to finish her documentation. Mitchell stood alone in the courtyard. The black sedan was still there, boot still open, evidence markers already placed around it, photographs being taken, documentation happening. In 24 hours, this would be all over the news. Royal scandal, child endangerment, questions about Camilla's fitness for her position. But right now, in this moment, Mitchell didn't care about any of that. He cared that Charlotte was safe, that she was with her parents, that the trauma might heal. He cared that he'd trusted his instincts, had performed his job properly, had refused to back down when someone tried to intimidate him into compliance. And he cared that maybe, just maybe, this would send a message to every guard in the palace, to every protection officer, to everyone who served the royal family. Your duty is to protect, not to obey blindly, not to look away when something's wrong, not to let authority become an excuse for harm. Protect, even when it's difficult, even when it costs you something, even when the threat comes from someone who wears a crown. Mitchell took a breath, straightened his uniform, walked back to his post. His shift wasn't over. He still had work to do. 3 hours later, Mitchell was in the guard station. Shift change had happened. He'd been relieved from active duty, but asked to remain on site for additional questioning. He sat in a small office. Plain walls, basic furniture, a cup of tea that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. The door opened. Princess Anne walked in. Mitchell stood immediately. Anne was something different. Not like Camilla, not like most of the family. Anne had served in the military, understood what duty meant, commanded genuine respect. "Sit down, Sergeant," Anne said. Not harsh, just direct. Mitchell sat. Anne took the chair across from him. "I've read the reports," Anne said. "I've spoken with Charlotte, and I've spoken with William." Mitchell waited, didn't know what to say. Anne studied him for a moment. "My mother would have been proud of you." Mitchell blinked. "Ma'am, Queen Elizabeth." Anne's voice was soft. She valued loyalty, real loyalty, not the kind that comes from titles or position, the kind that comes from doing what's right even when it's difficult. She paused. "You demonstrated that kind of loyalty today. You protected a child when someone who should have protected her didn't. That's not something we take lightly." "I was just doing my job, ma'am." "Yes," Anne said. "You were, but not everyone would have. Most people would have looked the other way, would have decided it wasn't their business, would have followed orders even when those orders were wrong." She leaned forward slightly. "My mother dealt with people like that her entire reign, people who valued position over principle, who cared more about preserving their own status than doing what was right." Mitchell didn't respond. Wasn't sure what Anne wanted him to say. "You're going to face consequences for this," Anne continued. "Camilla has already complained to Charles. She's claiming you assaulted her, that you ignored her direct orders, that you had no authority to inspect her vehicle." Mitchell's stomach tightened. "I see. Don't worry," Anne said quickly. "Charles knows better. He's seen the evidence. He's spoken to Charlotte. He knows what actually happened." She paused. But it's still going to be uncomfortable for you. The press will get hold of this. Your name will come out. People will have opinions. I understand, ma'am. Anne nodded. Good. Because I want you to know that William and I are behind you completely. If anyone tries to punish you for this, they'll have to go through us first. Something loosened in Mitchell's chest. Relief he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Thank you, ma'am. Anne stood. One more thing. William wants you assigned to the Children's Protection Detail permanently. He trusts you. After today, I think that trust is well placed. Mitchell stood as well. I'd be honored. Good. Anne moved toward the door, stopped, looked back at him. My mother had a saying. She used to tell it to her guards, especially the young ones who took their duty seriously. What was it, ma'am? The crown doesn't make you royal. How you treat people does. Anne smiled slightly. Remember that, Sergeant, because you showed more royalty today than someone who actually wears a crown. She left. The door closed quietly behind her. Mitchell stood alone in the office, processing, absorbing. Then he sat down, picked up his cold tea, drank it anyway. 24 hours later, the story broke. National news, international coverage, royal scandal of significant proportion. The details were carefully managed. Palace press office worked overtime, but the basic facts came out. Queen Camilla had bound Princess Charlotte with duct tape and locked her in a car boot. A royal guard had discovered her and freed her. The child was safe. An investigation was ongoing. The public reaction was immediate and harsh. Calls for Camilla to be stripped of her title. Demands for criminal prosecution. Protests outside Buckingham Palace. Mitchell stayed out of it. Declined all media interviews. Refused to comment. Just went to work every day, performed his job. But things had changed. Guards who'd previously kept their distance now nodded to him in corridors. Senior officers made a point of checking in with him. Even other members of the royal family, people he'd never spoken to before, would stop to say thank you. The message was clear. He'd done something that mattered. Something that reminded everyone what the guards were actually for. Not ceremony, not tradition, not standing still in fancy uniforms for tourists to photograph. Protection. Real protection. The kind that meant putting yourself between harm and the people you'd sworn to keep safe. 6 weeks after the incident, Mitchell was called to Kensington Palace. Private meeting, no explanation given. He arrived at the designated time, was escorted to a small sitting room, told to wait. 5 minutes later, Princess Charlotte walked in, with her parents, but she walked in first. She looked better, healthier. The fear had faded from her eyes. She was smiling. "Hi, Sergeant Mitchell," she said. "Hello, Princess Charlotte." She held out a piece of paper. "I made this for you." Mitchell took it carefully. A drawing, crayon on construction paper. A figure in a red uniform. A guard. Next to him, a smaller figure with a crown. In the top corner, written in a child's handwriting, "Thank you for saving me." Mitchell felt his throat tighten. "This is beautiful, thank you." Charlotte smiled. "Mommy said I should give it to you. Said you'd understand what it means." Kate stepped forward. "We wanted to see you in person, to thank you properly. What you did." She paused. "You saved our daughter. There's no adequate way to express what that means to us." William nodded. "Charlotte talks about you. She says you're her favorite guard. She says you listen when you're scared." Mitchell looked down at Charlotte. "Always, any time. If you ever need help, you find me. Or any guard who looks like me. Anyone in uniform. We're here to keep you safe." Charlotte nodded seriously. "I know, I'm not scared anymore." "Good." Mitchell knelt down to her level. "And if anyone ever makes you feel unsafe again, you tell someone immediately. You did exactly the right thing by making noise in the boot, by making sure I could hear you. That was very brave." "Papa said you were brave too," Charlotte said. "He said you didn't listen when Camilla told you to stop. He said sometimes not listening is the right thing to do." Mitchell glanced at William. The prince shrugged slightly. She asked. "I gave her an honest answer." Mitchell looked back at Charlotte. "Your papa is right. Sometimes rules matter. Sometimes what's right matters more." Charlotte threw her arms around Mitchell's neck, hugged him. Quick and fierce. "Thank you for finding me," she whispered. Mitchell hugged her back, gentle, careful. "You're welcome, Princess, you're very welcome." When she stepped back, Kate had tears in her eyes. William's jaw was tight. "We won't forget this," William said quietly. What you did, the risk you took, we won't forget. Mitchell stood. I was just doing my job, sir. No, William said firmly. You were doing what was right. Those aren't always the same thing. They talked for a few more minutes. Small talk, easier conversation. Then Mitchell was escorted out. He walked back through Kensington Palace, through corridors he'd walked dozens of times before, past paintings and artifacts and history. Everything looked the same, but felt different. Because he understood now, in a way he hadn't before, what this job actually meant. What it had always meant, but people sometimes forgot. These weren't just ceremonial positions. These weren't just traditions for tourists. This was real. The protection was real. The duty was real. And sometimes that duty meant standing up to the very people you were supposed to serve. Meant saying no when everyone expected you to say yes. Meant trusting your instincts over authority's orders. Mitchell had done that, had made that choice, had risked his career, his position, his entire future. And he'd do it again tomorrow, next week, whenever necessary. Because at the end of the day, when you stripped away all the ceremony and tradition and royal protocol, the job was simple. Keep children safe. Protect the innocent. Do what's right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Mitchell reached the palace gate, showed his credentials, was cleared for departure. He stepped out into London sunlight. Clear sky, autumn chill in the air. Behind him, Princess Charlotte was safe. In front of him, another shift tomorrow, another day of duty. He walked toward the underground station, pulled out his phone, looked at the photo he'd taken of Charlotte's drawing before returning it to her parents. A guard and a princess. Simple crayon figures, but meaning everything. Mitchell smiled, put his phone away, kept walking. Tomorrow, same time, same duty. And he'd be ready, always ready. Because royal guards aren't just ceremonial. They're the last line of defense. For history, for tradition, for the people who represent a nation. When everyone else looks away, they keep watching. When everyone else stays silent, they speak up. And when a child is locked in a boot, bound and terrified, they do what Sergeant David Mitchell did. They force it open. They refuse to back down. They protect, no matter what it costs.